Dude, you are getting well. Welcome, Dude Nation and dudes of all genders. Welcome to the conversation about getting well. This is the podcast where we interview leaders about how they've transformed. Let me try that again. How they've transformed their pain into their purpose, including myself, and how you can do the same. So if you're here, welcome. You're in the right place. There's nothing we're here to do to fix, but we are interested in creating solutions in the world and thriving for all humans. So if you're listening, really encourage you to ask questions, to engage with us. We'd be happy to hear from any of you. I'm so excited for this guest. It's a very special guest and someone whose work I really admire, as well as them as a human. This is TREEN REILKOFF. Welcome, TREEN.
Thanks, Ben. I'm excited to be here.
It's such an honor to have you. TREEN, you have such a fascinating story, and I just think you're a really cool human. Personally, I love the work that you're up to. Can you share a little bit about who you are and just from your perspective, rather than me telling people? How would you describe yourself, and what's important to you in the world? What's the TLR solutions for conflict? Like, why do you have that by your name?
I think where I'll start is my background is multifaceted of different professions, and life's a journey of where do I want to be? And what transpired through COVID was recognizing having a background in clinical mental health and doing prior counseling, workshops, coaching in higher risk and complex cases with adults and youth in communities, schools, hospital, jails, penitentiaries. It showed me that we're all human, and that with COVID being a worldwide trauma experience that created a lot of conflict, now is our opportunity to kind of create a baseline of building intergenerational conflict and trauma resiliency. We know that trauma sits on our epigenetics and is passed down through generations of 7 to 8 generations through the indigenous studies and the recent research in medical of how and where trauma sits. And trauma responses come out sometimes when you're not ready for it because of the environment you're in, and a trigger happens. But when we learn to recognize our triggers or the environments and have more of self-determination and empowerment in our experiences, we can transform them into conflict and trauma resiliency. And now is the time for us to create a leadership legacy around the world and build a baseline of trauma and conflict resiliency within ourselves, within our families, our partners, our community, our friends, for the next future generations of 7 to 8 generations from now. So that's a quick summary.
Wow, you said it. That was powerful. Thank you. You said a lot there, and so much value. So if you're listening, please let us know what's resonating. TREEN, wow. One of the things that really stood out to me, the fact that you can speak so clearly about what trauma is, and we can talk a little bit further about that. Like you said, what trauma responses are and how to heal them, and what could be possible if we were actually identified and had some some knowledge, right? Rather than just everything we make up about what might be going on. There's this incredible woman. Actually, maybe you all know each other. Jennifer Huff. You heard of her?
I've heard her name.
She's been a leader in a wellness organization in Canada for a long time, and she lives in Asheville, North Carolina now. And her partner Adam is my partner in Dude LLC. And Jennifer is a coach and a healer and a speaker. And I was sitting in her kitchen actually a couple weekends ago, and she was telling us this fascinating story. Our band had just played, and we were all kind of coming to that morning of breakfast, and and they allowed us to stay in their home. And she was saying, you know, the most interesting thing is that, and I love to tell people this, that you can look, and this is what she was telling us, like you can, when you look at a point on the wall, or looking at each other right now, the body, the eyes can actually only see one point at a time. And then the brain makes up everything else that's going on. Like we think we can see all this stuff, but it's actually the brain creating that, giving us that information. So we each have completely different perspectives.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of trauma, like the things we may make up about what's going on versus like, well, here's what's so, and there's actually something you can do about it if you know what's
Mhm.
going on. Does that resonate, like speak to capture some of what you're talking about?
Yeah, because when we look at the topic of trauma, we look at not only like a car accident, that's very traumatic, and it depends on the severity. And they talk about big T's and little T's, small
Mm,
traumas and big traumas.
mm,
And how you react is individual. There's no right, wrong, there's no book for it, there's no diagnosis, there's no predetermining. And then we have to integrate intergenerational and cultural traumas that are part of who we are. It's our makeup. But when we look at kind of where I look at conflict and trauma, is to really use it as a tool of empowerment, self determination, change, growth by being transparent and by being vulnerable. You can embrace your trauma and conflict experiences. And through the coaching I do in workshops and assessments, it's if you can't name your skill sets or the environmental contexts where you use these skills to manage, cope, and move through a traumatic or a very high conflict experience, how do you take it out of your back pocket for that next time?
I love that. I'm writing some of what you're saying down so that our listeners also can follow it. It helps me to listen. Because I appreciate you speaking in sound bites so that we can actually capture it. Because you're, you know, I appreciate, you know, I'm also appreciating that this may be this first time some of us, I know for me, are hearing things said in this way. Like we're receiving information about cultural and intergenerational trauma, about big T's and little T's, big traumas in our lives and small traumas in our life. I mean, we could do multiple episodes on this. We're definitely going to have you back. Uh, and I also heard you say by being transparent, being vulnerable, like, we can begin to transform our trauma. And by naming it, like how are you going to bring it back out? I remember being in our when I first went to acting school at NYU, I was in the Lee Strasberg Theater Institute, and people would say if you went in there, you'd think there's like this giant group therapy session going on because there's all these people in chairs and they're going, ah, making sounds. But Lee was on to something as he was studying with Stanislavski, who had probably studied with some psychiatrist or psychologist at some point, that we actually store stuff in our body. And so we as actors were moving and doing a type of relaxation to allow things to move, because our teachers would say, well, you don't want to be on stage and like emotionally call something up and then freeze and shut down because you don't
Yeah.
know what's happening. So like understanding your body. And I'm seeing now, as you shared that, I had a vision of us like, oh wow, we were actually onto something. We got shamed for that as
Mhm.
actors and in school. And now I'm like, you know, go Lee. Like he's not even alive today and he was
Yeah.
onto something. So
Yeah. No, I can share a personal example
yeah, please
of
do.
a trauma experience that where when you were sharing, Ben, the body remembers, the body holds on to it. Um, I'll condense the story, but basically, I was working and went for some drinks and wings with friends after work, coworkers, and so we're in this pub, and I'm having chicken wings, and I get a chicken wing stuck in my throat, and it was like
Mm,
right here, and you could actually feel it, and I
mm,
couldn't make the swallowing motion. So what does a smart person do? You try bread. That didn't work. Then you do what a real smart person is not supposed to do, is go to the bathroom by yourself when you're choking to try and remove and dislodge it.
mm,
That didn't work. So then I had to go back to the table, and it was very painful, and I couldn't swallow. And in the strip mall where the pub was, there was a walk-in clinic. So I told my peers that I'm going to go to the walk-in clinic because I'm choking on a chicken bone.
You're able to talk and
Yeah,
communicate that
but I
during
couldn't
this?
swallow,
Oh my
and you could
gosh.
feel it.
Oh, wow.
So I go to the walk-in clinic, and it's lodged too far down. So he tells me I have to go to Emerge. I'm a single mom. My kids are home alone, old enough to be home alone. I have a dog who loves car rides, a Rottweiler in the vehicle, and it's wintertime. And so I have to go to Emerge, let my kids know I'm going to Emerge, let neighbors, friends know, to check in on them, drop my dog off at a friend's place to go to Emerge, to where they had to then call in an ear, nose, throat specialist.
Wait, Emerge, I'm assuming that's Canadian for emergency room.
Yeah.
Right? Okay,
In the hospital. So as I'm sitting there waiting, they had to take an x-ray and they could see the chicken bone. And as I'm sitting there waiting, I can hear the nurses, and there were some fellowship doctors there talking about, we've never had this before, we've never seen it. And the nurse comes to me, and I'm the only one in emergency. And she goes, is there anybody we need to contact to let them know you're here? And in that millisecond, I went from, my kids are home alone, what if I die? And my eyes started welling up. And the nurse goes, don't cry, because you won't be able to breathe. You won't be able to swallow. What do you need? So having worked clinical social work in hospitals before and in mental health, I knew what the medication was that I needed to calm that panic before I had a panic attack or started crying. So they gave me some medication. I waited for the doctor to come. They gave me more medication. They actually sent me home, and I had to come back for day surgery. So I go home, come back for day surgery, the chicken bone's removed, and I returned to work the next day. And I'm working in a first responder environment. And as I walk into the building, one of the other employees looks at me, because, of course, the story has just gone full blown everywhere, because it's in a smaller community as well. Trina choked on a chicken bone. So as I walked in, they said, hey, Trina, do you want to go for beer and wings at and name the pub? In that millisecond, my body, in my mind, I know I'm okay. I'm alive. I went to work today. I am good. But in that millisecond after hearing that, my body went into a violent shaking, and I started dry heaving, and I was just sweating and perspiring like no tomorrow. And I'm like, what's going on? My head, cognitively, my brain knows I'm safe. I'm okay. I'm back to work. But my body was telling me, there's no way in this near future you're going for drinks and chicken wings at this pub. And it took me 3 years of exposure therapy, me doing, because I used to counsel in it, to be able to go back and enjoy and have chicken wings. People couldn't even say the word without me violently starting to shake and perspire. So when we have an experience cognitively in our brains, we might know we're okay and we think we're okay. But if we're not in tune to what our body is telling us, we haven't been able to resolve that experience. And resolving that experience means being able to talk about it without having a somatic, behavioral, emotional reaction when talking about it.
Can you say, for those people who don't know, what a somatic, behavioral, emotional reaction is?
Anything your body reacts to. So it could be, common ones are, you could feel like you're choking or you can't breathe. Your heart is racing and you feel like you're having a heart attack. Your teeth are clenched, your shoulders, your fists are clenched. A common one is you start shaking. It doesn't have to be your whole body. It could be your hands start shaking, or you're sitting and one leg, one knee starts shaking, and you're moving, and there's adrenaline, cortisol is going through your body because it's trying to process the memory that has not resolved itself from the experience, a critical incident, a traumatic incident, a high conflict. So a car accident, divorce, right? How I came to this passion to teach coach people how to identify their resilient traits, but also looking at as a risk mitigation strategy, personally, professionally, organizationally, and operationally. You got to be able to use those past experiences to prepare for that next trauma, adversity, or conflict.
There's a lot of great things here. I'd love to ask you a few questions about
Sure.
what you said, and if you're listening, welcome, and please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Some of you may have to click something to get permission to post it, but go for it. It's just allowing you to post here as we're live. So thank you, Trina. Already, I'm getting so much value out of this, and I know our listeners are too. You've I want to really, give compassion and also acknowledgement for sharing your story and your experience. That sounds terrifying. It was uncomfortable just to listen to the story and like how long you went on continuing through that whole experience, let alone, and then there was another thing you identified is that you started breaking out in sweats when people asked you to go. So, I want to really identify that for our listeners. Looking back, knowing what you know now, like what would you identify, or for those of us who may identify with going through that in that moment, what's the experience? Is that so when we're shaking in that moment and someone just says something to you and you start having a response, I remember once I was in an Al-Anon meeting, Al-Anon family groups of friends and families of alcoholics, and supportive, and saying that for people here too. It's one of the greatest free places I knew to go to work out codependency and relationship dynamics. And one of the things I heard there was this: if it's hysterical, it's historical. So if I'm having some kind of seemingly hysterical response and I don't know what it's going on, or if someone's responding in a way that I think is absolutely hysterical or doesn't make sense, that consider it may not be about me or this moment. It could be something from before. And so I'm getting clued into like, oh, that may be the beginning of trauma. So in that moment, when you were going through that, like, would you call that one of those traumas, one of those little T's or big T's?
It was a big T, because I remember the point in time of where it was life-threatening, when I thought, what if I died and my kids were home alone? And that's what kind of cemented to make it a big T, not a little t. And when we look at my reactions, you'll have trauma responses, and there's fight, flight, fawn, freeze, and flop. So fight is like
I haven't heard flop before. I love
right?
that. Yeah.
So fight is, that aggression, that yelling, that reactive, impulse controlled, you just kind of aggressive and just comes out of nowhere. The volcano has blown. Flight is the shaking of, okay, I want to run. I want to, like, I got energy. I got to get out of here. You want to run away. Freeze is basically kind of like that deer in the headlights, or like freeze is like test anxiety. You've studied, you go in, and all of a sudden you're just blank. And you're having a conversation, but you can't recall anything, and you're in a frozen state, and you look like you're spaced out. The fawn is one that's not part of our behavior, or not part of us as we're born. So when freeze, fight, and flight occur, that's because our amygdala, the little old brain of like the fire alarm in prehistoric times, when the saber-tooth is chasing you, you run, right? You don't fight it, you run. So our amygdala is our alarm system that we're born with. And when that goes off, that means our prefrontal cortex of our brain, executive functioning, where we think, make decisions, it just shuts down. So you can't process. Fawn is very common in yes people, where there's been bullying in the workplace, family violence, where you've just learned to say yes, even though you know you're right or it's not safe. You say yes because that's your escape. That's how you're responding to that high complex trauma or conflict. Flop, which I have experienced twice, actually. Once in a vet, when I thought my dog might have to be passed put down. And another time, first year university, when I was stalked and somebody tried to break into my room. And I remember just hearing a knock, hearing voices, and taking a deep breath in. And I woke up 3 hours later. So flop is when you literally pass out. That's your trauma response for safety.
Wow.
And you don't know when that might happen.
No pressure. Yeah. I'm just writing these down. And so if you're dropping in here, you can go back over the notes where we've posted these live in Facebook and YouTube and look at it. So I love that how you've broken it down into fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I love that, especially as a people pleaser, recovering people pleaser. I definitely recognize that, and flop, right, is really powerful. I think that's one we don't talk about much.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for bringing that forward, including your own experience.
And you take that experience and how do you transform it into powerful, resilient tools is you have to recognize what were your resilient traits? What were my resilient traits that I was able to pull out and use so I kept moving forward in life and being successful and learning and growing rather than potentially living in fear. So I could have resolved to never eat chicken wings again, but I like chicken wings, right? When I experienced that first year university being stalked, I could have feared going out by myself. But what I did is I set up safety, situational awareness, learned self-defense, and trusted in myself that I wasn't going to let anybody change my first year experience of university and enjoying it. So my perseverance, my flexibility, my adaptability, having a community, having faith were some resilient traits that I have carried and grown and expanded upon. And so resilient traits are, you're either born with some and you've developed them through the years, but you got to be able to name them and where you've actually used them. But that's the joy of resiliency and our neuroplasticity of our brain. We can want to develop ones, identify them, name them, and then learn to develop those resilient traits through our neuroplasticity.
Yes, yes, yes. I am picking up what you're putting down. This is such gold. Thank you, Trina. And because that was my next question. So thank you for bringing that forward already. So I'm really hearing the pathway is identifying our resilient traits and being able to not just name what's going on, but, to look back on something and say, what got me through that? Not just like I'm a survivor, I'm a fighter, but let's really get clear. We have this, I'm part of a executive coaching collective called the Treehouse Collective, and we're all doing what is it? Gallup's leadership poll. Have you heard about this?
Yeah.
And so learning to identify some of our strengths are that we could actually promote more of in each other. And so I'm thinking of how to identify our traits ourselves too. And while it's great to have something online that can do that for you, in the moment, Trina, and with your clients, where do you really start? Where can we start in identifying our resilient traits?
Well, I do have some assessment tools like through my training because I got trained by this guru 25 years ago in California. And I like to start, it's kind of like you're developing your resilient roadmap as a risk mitigation strategy. You're moving from SOS to SRSR, self-reflection strengthens resiliency. It's kind of my motto I kind of made up because you can visualize it. And
SOS to SRSR.
Yeah. Self-reflection strengthens resiliency. So what I kind of created one day when I kind of purposely decided I'm going to move more into my passion, but link it to conflict management, trauma-informed practices, and what I do. It was kind of deciding I needed to make a list of all my experiences. So I put 3 columns: personal, professional, and environmental. And I wrote down everything I could remember of my experiences. And like when we're looking environmental, this is like hurricane, been in an earthquake, almost struck by lightning, being stalked by a cougar in the forest in British Columbia, right? Stuff that environmentally you have no control over. And I wrote them down. And my first step was I needed to be vulnerable enough to share my list with somebody I trusted. Because conquering that fear, that anxiety, that will I be shamed? Will someone look at me differently because I shared my vulnerable experiences? So you pick somebody who you trust. And what was interesting, I actually had 3 people that I shared it with, and I asked for one-word comment after I shared all my experiences. And one was just wow. Another one of a dear good friend was something I won't repeat, but it made me laugh. And then another dear friend goes, "You read that like a grocery list." And why did I read it like a grocery list? Because that was my protective mechanism, that I could read it, list it, recognize it, and here's all my life experiences. And then after that, I needed to start identifying what were my resilient traits after each experience. What was the environmental context? What did I learn? How did I cope? And what did it look like moving forward to where I am now? And how have I applied it without even recognizing it? So I kind of have like a roadmap process where I do resiliency coaching and trauma coaching, divorce, separation, or just leadership in the sense of how to excel your leadership for workplaces. Because after COVID, and we now know mental health in the workplace and wellness is very important. And we have to create psychological health and safe workplaces. And that comes when we collaboratively empower and share and identify people's personal, professional, resilient, conflict resilient traits. But also, let's identify collaboratively the solutions to the organizational and operational resiliency. Because resiliency isn't sometimes about the bounce back. It's more than bouncing back. Resiliency is risk mitigation. Resiliency is about not just bouncing back, it's moving forward and flourishing ahead. It's not stopping where you bounce back to, because you now have skills and tools from that bounce back to take that next step forward.
I love that. I hope you're picking that up if you're listening. And I want to thank you so much for this and for sharing your tools here with us. I want to take a moment to share your website here with our listeners so that everyone, it's listed here. You see TLR solutions for conflict. So that is part of the website, which I'll share here in the comments. And then if you subscribe to our podcast, if you're not already, go ahead and click subscribe to wherever you love to stream podcasts. Dude, You're Getting Well, and or subscribe here on YouTube so that you can be the first one to find out when this goes live, to get the tools and the feedback. And we're going to share some of these key takeaways. Treena, it's so awesome to have you here.
And I did add, I do have an Instagram post where Believe in Resiliency is where there's tips, tools, and motivational learning to get, to see where it fits into your world that day, that month, that week.
I love that. I'm going to follow that right now. Believe in Resiliency. I added that here for everyone. And we'll add that to our newsletter. So another way to join and find out first when this drops is to subscribe to our newsletter. But I'm just so grateful to have each one of you here today. And Treena is being part of the solution for us. We're running short on time. So if you didn't get a chance to listen to the whole episode live here, please go back, subscribe, notify, and listen to it from the beginning. You can rate this, and also importantly, don't just sit in it, like do something, take some action, get in touch with Trina if you're moved by this, if you want to learn more. The ball is in your court. Trina, I'd love to ask you a few closing questions that we ask all our guests. Are you ready to dive in?
Dive in.
Okay, this is the fun dude part. So if your life, just because this whole thing started from Hollywood and my meltdown and trauma and healing from that, if your life were a Hollywood film up until this point, what would the title of it be?
Oh, the title of it? Wow. Believe in Resiliency. The story of a Hallmark that turns into a Netflix with no blood or death yet.
Nice. It's
a Netflix. That. You never know what could happen, right?
That's right. Yeah, maybe it'll get picked up for a whole season, turn into a whole series.
But believe in resiliency. Believe in your resiliency.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And while you're sharing, we had a quote from Max. So thank you, Maximus, for sharing. And he said, thank you, Trina, for this. Maximus, if you have any questions for us, feel free to drop them in. And thank you so much for listening. So Trina, believe in resiliency. So if you're, I usually ask if your current partner or ex were to name this movie, what might they call it?
Oh, yeah. Probably nothing I could say on the live podcast.
Okay, so we'll call, yeah, not yet rated.
Don't call me. I'll call you.
Yeah, that's great. That works. And who would you cast as your parents in this film if you could cast anyone?
Oh, wow. Maybe that'd be a hard one. I can't think of the actor's name from Bewitched.
The original?
Yeah.
We have Heather Locklear was mentioned.
The other one, that like the old one where she would...
it's on the tip of my tongue. So her.
Yeah, her awesome. For my mom. And I think it would be there's two that keeps coming to mind, but Adam Sandler for my dad.
Elizabeth Montgomery, that's the original. Yeah, and Adam Sandler for your dad. I love it. Wow, that'd be a special movie.
It'd be unique.
Yeah. And do you have any like secret hidden talents or passions that most people don't know about?
I think the hidden talent is helping people believe and trust in themselves. If you've ever reached that point of where you can't cry or you don't cry, I can make anybody cry in a supportive, empathetic, safe way to allow them to feel safe to feel. Because crying, when I took a workshop a long time ago when I used to work with kids, is how to kind of help kids at that point of when they stop that ability to cry. And they did some tests in like labs of tears, of stress and hurt and pain and trauma. And when you hold in those tears, those poisonous chemicals go back into our body. So when they tested the tears, there was enough poisons to kill rats. So if I have a skill, it's making somebody cry, but in that safe manner to allow to feel, to start the progress and the journey to heal, because it's our own personal journey and there's no right or wrong.
Amen. You said it. You got to feel to heal. I have been trying to figure out who in my life told me about this tears held in or poisoning you. And I had it as someone else and I was trying to remember the source, and I mentioned it and someone said, well, who's the source? You should know. And I was like, I don't know, but I think it's powerful. Like, what if it's just what if it's real? Like just that concept alone.
It was
Where did you learn about it?
Dr. David Neufeld.
Amazing.
He's out of BC. He's a child psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
And basically and this workshop is like probably over 25 years I went to it. He's got a few books, but it was about how to help youth and support them before those are the youth that are the high risk and they're heading for juvie hall or for jail because they've lost the ability to care for themselves and they've lost that ability to feel.
Wow. That's
Gordon
a
Neufeld, not David
superpower.
Neufeld, sorry. Dr. Gordon Neufeld.
Gordon Neufeld.
Yeah.
It's really for the care for themselves and to feel.
Yeah.
And Dr. Gordon Neufeld. So we'll add that in here. Yeah, I'm going to share that. That's so powerful. If we teach people not to cry, and if we're not crying, that we're poisoning ourselves. And so to nurture tears, I mean, God, it's why I started Dude School. We had it last night, actually. There was a guy trying to talk through something, and I was just like, stop and breathe. And he just started weeping. And we just held space for him. And that was like probably he said even his best friends had never held space for him like that.
And you said a good point there, which is like another tool. When we're under high stress, trauma, conflict, fear, we stop breathing. Humans, we automatically stop breathing and we don't know we stop breathing. So when we stop breathing, the blood pressure rises, the muscles get tense, our amygdala is triggered. So we have to cue ourselves to breathe and breathe properly, that we're allowing oxygen in. And it sounds like the simplest tool to do, but you have to master it before you really need it. So it becomes a habit.
I love how much you talk about working with these things, and if you've got to feel it to heal it, you've that you get to actually then have that in your tool bag of things to call from and how to work with in the future and maybe help someone else be like, yeah, I came out through that on the other side too.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate how much of your experience you've shared here. The other thing I'd want to ask is if you could give the world one gift today and just wave a magic wand and we've got it, what would you give us?
You got that little bell. Ooh. That timing of it. That you go out and you identify whether it's your partner, your kid, a friend in the workplace. Identify something that you appreciate of somebody else's skill set, their strength, something that motivates you, that you've seen them help get them through a hard time or support you. Because when we help people identify their resilient strengths, we're now creating and building that intergenerational conflict and trauma resiliency.
Ooh, that's a good one. And it's free and you can go spread it. I love that. Beautiful. So go you can help identify someone else's resilient strengths. You could even tell them, like, I see this in you, like this is a strength. They may be like, whoa, wow, really?
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be huge.
That before. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. It's interesting how much of us feel like, even myself right now, I'll say I could speak for myself, like need permission to go do things like that. I love talking to people. My bandmates call me Mr. Rogers because everywhere we go around the world, I'm like, I want to talk to people. I wear my Dude School sweatshirt and it's like, 99.9% of the time, only women ask me about it, but I still get to talk about what I'm creating in the world. And I so love just who you are and that you've spoken forward, and thank you for saying yes to being on this show.
Thank you for the invite.
It's so moving. You said that you would leave us all with that ability to do that. So thank you. And if you were able to give us that gift, we had that gift, what do you see us all doing?
When you go to your workplace or you're having your, meeting group, and there's always that round table and it's silent and nobody wants to speak up, take the lead and suggest a round table of gratitude, because, or a round table of recognize a resilient trait of the organization, of the operations, professionally, personally. But we do know when we recognize resilient traits, we're giving gratitude. And when you receive and give gratitude, you naturally produce the happy hormones of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin in our bodies. So we actually make ourselves healthier by giving and receiving gratitude.
Another gold nugget. I mean, I love this because we can actually, it's one thing to just say like gratitude makes you feel better. And like every dude, especially love telling that to executives. They're like, really, you want me to start a gratitude list and all the extra free time I have? But when you talk about the science of it, it's unmistakable. So thank you for sharing like the chemical, it's science.
Yeah. And if you do it practice, like what my practice is, when I wake up first thing in the morning, before anything, I list 5 things I'm grateful for. And it could be, I'm grateful for, I feel so cozy in my bed. I'm grateful for, I have electricity. And before I go to bed, that is the last thought I have, is I list 5 to 10 things I'm grateful for. Because then you've put into your subconscious that positive hormones to help you when you go to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, I generally wake up with stinking thinking in the mornings and, need some kind of reset. So I love that. Like for me, it's a physical practice and a mental practice of sitting and creating that. And so thank you for that. They'll just sit there, do something.
Yeah.
Trina, it's been such an honor to have you on the show. I really, really appreciate your time and your wisdom and your vulnerability and your leadership. Yeah, it's really beautiful. I'm really moved by who you are, and any way that we can support you, please don't hesitate to let us know. We're going to be sharing this everywhere you all stream podcasts, so be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Follow Trina. Go check out TRL Solutions for Conflict.ca. So that's here in the comments, and I'm going to post it again for each of you. For all of you on our mailing list, you'll get that right in our inbox, and you'll be seeing a lot more from Trina from us in the near future. And Trina, I hope we can have you back on the show. I mean, each one of these resilience drinks we could have a whole masterclass on. So if you do have things for our community or trainings or workshops that you recommend, resources, please don't hesitate to share them with us. I'd be happy to share that on your behalf. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for listening. Have a beautiful day. And dudes, you're getting well.